Good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle Wright, and I'm one of the AARCH historians, and I will be here kind of guiding us this evening.
There you go.
It's weird to hear myself feedback. Okay. Good to see so many familiar faces. Good to see some new faces in this beautiful location. This is my first time here at the Rollins Chapel, so this is absolutely gorgeous. We want to thank Gary Rollins, and everyone who allowed us to be here this evening. I'm going to get everyone seated. Okay, we're here for the recovery.
Too close to the speaker.
All right, I'm not good with this. I'm usually pretty loud, so I'll stand over here. We're here for the Recovering Identity Project. For those of you who are not familiar with Recovering Identity, this is a project to collect stories, history, and make an account of everything that's happened with regards to African American history in Frederick County. And this is the kickoff. Tonight is the kickoff for Phase 2 of Recovering Identity. Phase 1 was Northern County, and we'll be hearing a little bit later from Liz Comer and some of the work that was done at the Catoctin Furnace and in the northern part of Frederick County. But this is Phase 2, which is going to be the continuation and some other projects that we're going to be doing to collect history. This is a partnership between the Frederick County government and the AARCH Society. And we'll be hearing a little bit from the executive director from AARCH in just a minute. But this was made possible. Let me make sure I get the grant name right. I have to read that. I need a cheat sheet for that. From the Maryland Historical Trust, which is a division of the Maryland Department of Planning. And Frederick County was awarded that, and also Frederick County put in additional funds to make this project possible. So this is the actual kickoff of Phase 2 that we're here tonight. And this evening, we encourage as much feedback as possible. We want to hear from you. This is a community meeting, so we want to hear what you have to say. So if you have questions, please feel free, raise your hand, and let us know. There will be Q&A at the end of the program if you want to wait until then. But we have a lot of wonderful speakers here that are going to tell you about some of the projects that are going on in Frederick County with regards to African American history. So I just want to thank everyone for coming in, and we're going to start out. We're going to hear from our new executive director for AARCH, Dr. Cheryl Gooch, who is going to say a few words about AARCH's contributions to the Recovering Identity Project. You're not going to use the mic? I tend to pop. I'll just project. Okay. I'm dangerous with mics. Okay. Evidently, I am too.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
This is a wonderful opportunity for us to really kind of get on the same page. I am new to AARCH Society and to Frederick County, but not new to historic resource studies, in which I have a deep, enduring interest. So this is an opportunity to hear more about the findings of Phase 1 and the strategies and next steps for Phase 2. Now, it's been a long day. I know we have some structured time to get through this, and so that I don't digress as I often do when I take the lectern, I'm going to refer to just some brief prepared notes. So, recovering aspects of American history that have been obscured, lost, ignored, or even distorted is essential. It's essential that we do this. All of us, I believe, benefit from gaining a more informed, complex understanding and awareness of our shared history as Americans. Do you agree?
Yes.
This is our shared history. This historic resource study is an important first step. Now, as a historian of African ancestry whose forebears were once enslaved, historic resource studies often leave lots of, in my mind, unpursued questions on the table. Like, where is my history in that building, that structure, that space? What were the experiences and social histories of the people who lived and worked there, in those buildings, in those spaces? So, as researchers, and many of us are, we understand that the assumptions that inform the questions that we ask determine what we find or don't find. How are descendants engaged in the process, from the formulation of the scope of work to the strategies, to the methodologies to gather and document and even interpret that information? Where's my history in that research? Asks really this descendant, these descendants. So in recent years, some more defined, engaging descendant community models have evolved and are still evolving, from the African burial ground in Lower Manhattan to Montpelier in Virginia. And speaking of Montpelier, several years ago, there was what was called the National Summit on Teaching Slavery, convened there in Montpelier. And what they produced was a great rubric, and some of you have probably seen this, that is a useful tool to inform how we research and document as well as interpret some of these sites. So on behalf of AARCH, again, this is an important and very necessary endeavor, and the descendants, stakeholders remain attentive and interested in the recovery of Frederick County's history. Thank you.
Well, good evening. I'm not going to use the microphone either, but if you cannot hear me, because I do tend to talk a little soft as I keep talking, please let me know and I'll turn it on. My name is Amanda Whitmore. I'm one of the historic preservation planners with the county, and I'm really excited to see so many people here this evening. We're really, really excited about phase 2 of this project. We want to thank, can you click on the next slide? Thanks. We want to thank AARCH for their support and collaboration on this project, and of course, as Michelle said, we couldn't be here today without the funding from Maryland Historical Trust. Next slide, please. So why are we doing this? Why are we here? As Michelle mentioned, Elizabeth's going to talk to you all in a little bit about phase 1. That was focused on the northern part of the county in the context of that. We are kind of refocusing and looking countywide at African American history. Many people tend to view history mainly through the lens of oral traditions and written documents, but it's important to recognize that physical spaces, such as buildings, structures, and properties, also significantly contribute to shaping our shared memories. The scarcity of places that evoke Black history isn't unique to Frederick County or even Maryland. Of the 95,000 sites listed on the National Register of Historic Places, only 2% focus on the experiences of Black history, according to the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund in 2020. And here in Frederick County, we have 140 sites listed on the National Register, and less than 1% of those sites focus specifically on Black history. This denies all of us the ability to reflect on, learn from, and honor a more complete view of the past. Several sites on the National Register focus on the injustices and atrocities endured by enslaved African people and their descendants. But as important as it is to highlight those injustices, this context study also provides an opportunity to highlight a much fuller story that emphasizes African Americans as agents in their own story. Next slide, please. So what should we expect from this study? It's going to be a focus on places, sites and structures and buildings that help tell the story of the people. It's not going to be a definitive history. It's going to be it's not going to be all-encompassing. It's going to just try to get as much of the information in the study as we can to identify themes. Next slide, please. So the benefits of a historic context study include the ability to honor influential people and places, share collected knowledge with the public, empower independent community projects, and guide future planning efforts through identification of historic places. Our historic preservation movement has not made sure all Americans can see the racial and ethnic groups' experiences reflected when they visit historic sites. Black churches, schools, and settlements were not prioritized by agencies and groups calling the shots about what to save. Instead, preservationists focused on the kinds of grand homes, imposing institutions, and governmental buildings that were themselves the product of the racially excluded institutions that dominated American history. Given the other inequalities and challenges they faced, Black communities often had neither the time nor the money to advocate for and fund the restoration of Black historic sites. As a result, many sites have been lost to decay or demolition, lending an urgency to protect those that still remain. And I put this image, sorry, can you go back one? I put this image of the Jonathan Street cabin. I don't know how many people are familiar with that story in Hagerstown, but I love this story because this city was going to demolish the structure. It had, I think a cop car had run into it in the middle of the night or something. The city just determined it needed to be demolished, but the local community came and said, no, this is an important structure to our history, to the Black community on Jonathan Street, and through their efforts and their advocacy, they got Preservation Maryland involved, the city leaders, county leaders involved, and they rehabbed this cabin. They turned it into, with Habitat for Humanity, they turned it into a livable space for a new family to be in that location. So that is a positive outcome of what preservation and what we think this study can eventually lead to for Frederick County. Next slide, please. So what is a historic context study? Next slide. A historic context study provides a comprehensive, high-level overview and historical narrative of a specific theme. It identifies historic places that are important around a specific theme. It recommends buildings and sites that may be eligible for historic designation, and it provides a way to evaluate places to discover later. So we are engaging with a consultant, and I don't see Christy here. She had some family things come up, and she wasn't sure if she'd make it on time. But Christy Baynard is the Cultural Resource Manager with Marcel Day, and they'll be the lead on this project and doing the research. Her and her team have extensive experience in historic preservation and cultural resources, and they've completed similar projects of underrepresented communities in the country. Deliverables that you can expect from this project include the context narrative, a list of places that will be eligible for designation, which would be part of the next phase that we would go into, and then do a more fully documented research history on each of those locations. We're conducting oral histories, which my colleague Bo will be talking about briefly here in a minute. We're going to be holding additional community meetings beyond just this one, and then recommendations for future study that we can come out from this project and explore further of the history. Next slide. So this is what the timeline that we have proposed and drafted for this project. As you can see, this is our initial community meeting and kickoff for tonight. The consultants are researching and identifying themes. We should have those by the end of December. And then we want to bring the community back together to hear and share what those themes were that they found through the research, continue to get your feedback and comments on the project, and update you on our progress. And then we should have a draft overview by June. We're going to have a panel of 3 reviewers to look at that draft context to make sure we're not including any biases or anything like that in the context. And then we should have the final product by July of 2025. So it's a bit of a lengthy process to gather all the information and research and history in the county. For more information, you can check out our project page on the Frederick County's website under Recovering Identity Project. We also are doing a survey. We have it online on our website. There's a couple of handouts, I think, still over there on the piano. If anybody wants to fill out, we're looking for sites, locations that have any African American Association history with them that we can then look at and explore further for the project. And then our contact is up on the website as well. And this is just what that survey looks like, and again, the web address. So again, you can fill it out online, and if you choose to have it pointed, it'll point to different locations in the county. These are a few that we had an intern over the summer put in a few sites, African American schools, and I think a few other sites on that map, so we can start gathering and collecting and seeing where all of these locations are. One of those locations is the Point of Rocks Colored Cemetery, and I'm not sure, is Kenneth Parker and Eric Ashby here by chance? Okay. If you guys want to come up for just a little bit and talk a little bit about your project and your efforts, Kenneth Parker and Eric Ashby are caretakers and descendants from this cemetery, and they can talk a little bit about what they've been doing to preserve and take care of that cemetery.
Amanda, just a quick question. The survey, what are the types of questions that the survey presents?
It's asking for the type, so is it a house, is it a place where an event occurred, a church, a school, and then just a brief description and location information to share with us as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Ashby Bay, and this is my cousin, Kenneth Parker. And we are here representing the Point of Rocks Colored Cemetery of 1878. 1879. And it is our ancestral burial ground. My grandmother, great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother, many grandfathers, many people of our lineage are buried there. And it is a historical site, and it has not been designated as such so far, but we are working to get it to that status because my great-grandmother, I just pulled her up. So, she was born in 1838. And she's buried in the colored cemetery at Point of Rocks. Her name, Jane Parker Swan Whalen. And some of our family names is Whalen, Proctor, Boynes, Lair, Calliman, Parker, Swan, many names that are in the cemetery, and many people from those ancestors are walking in Frederick, Baltimore. I'm from Baltimore myself today, and it needs to be designated as a historical site. One of the other things that I want to do personally is, because it has a sign that calls it the Colored Cemetery, I want to add a plaque to that and explain why we were called colored. We were never colored. We were never black. We were never Negroes. That's what we were called. And unfortunately we answered to it. So that's just some of the things that we're doing. And this, my cousin Kenneth Parker has been instrumental in keeping up the cemetery for the past 25 or more years. He took it over from my uncles years ago, and he has done a fantastic job. And we're just glad to be here and looking for any help that we can get.
Thank you for sharing that. That's so incredibly important. If you follow history around the country, you know that these lost cemeteries that are we know what's going on at Frederick Memorial Hospital and with the cemetery there, but other cemeteries around the country, I go to conferences and hear about cemeteries under parking lots, under malls, under other things that just did not garner any modicum of respect or understanding that African Americans have been marginalized, that even after life, even in death, that those lives are still not respected. So this is important. So this meeting is all about us supporting all of the work that individual people are doing throughout the county and coming together and making sure that we're supporting each other, that these networks, that we're not working in silos and doing this work independently without connecting with each other. I just want to add, I know you're probably like, what is she saying now? But a project that I'm working on now, and I live in Baltimore, but I was born and raised here in Frederick, born here at Frederick Memorial Hospital. My mom is here. I'm so glad that because she has a lot of history to share as well. And so I come back to Frederick quite often. But I will tell you this, one of the reasons why I left Frederick was the lack of appreciation of that history. When I graduated from TJ, it was something that was not in the curriculum. It was something I didn't learn about. I did not even know that TJ was a school. You're smiling because you know what I'm getting ready to say. Was the big building right next to it was a plantation. I would go out for gym and play tennis and do so. I did not know that I was on a plantation of the first governor of the state of Maryland. How can I grow up in a place and not know that information? It's one of those things, yes.
But similar to what you're talking about, right in Baltimore County, Hampton Mansion. That was the furthest, most northern plantation of the South. And a lot of the slaves that were enslaved at Hampton Mansion, they were some of them were freed and they moved to East Baltimore.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for that slave community in East Baltimore, particularly Fells Point, during the War of 1812,
Yes.
we might be in New England right now.
You're right. I do research. I'm doing research in Baltimore County. The college that I teach at is a former plantation, and so I'm doing the research. And there were connections because there were things like slave leasing, where they would lease back and forth. Different iron plantations would lease back and forth. So they would lease from Frederick County, bring them out to Baltimore, but then lease within all of the other iron masters in the iron plantations. So there are more forms of enslavement than just agricultural enslavement. Industrial enslavement is huge, and in this region, iron plantations and iron enslavement, as well as equestrian enslavement, is another thing that I look at. The horse racing industry of the 19th century. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, Jessup Prison.
Oh yeah.
Was a plantation.
I know. I've been.
And I didn't know that until I'm an electrician.
Yeah.
And so I learned that when I went in there to do electrical work.
I knew that as well. I visited inmates there, and the inmates actually told me that was too. Yeah, I love that you guys want to share. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
How did you graduate from school and not know that TJ was the scene of a plantation?
How did I?
Yeah, it was a sardonic question.
Okay.
How did it happen? How did it happen? And it happened because of the curriculum. It happened because the access of the African American experience and experience of other people in the curriculum. So I think that in conjunction with what we're doing here, which is admirable, we have to advocate for it to be in the curriculum because that's the prophecy. Because African Americans contribute tax dollars to the county, and the big expenditure of the county, of course, is education.
Right.
So in terms of that, but I will say about Licksville, like the Licksville.
My grandmother's from Licksville.
And that was a trade center.
Yes.
Started to do survey on Licksville.
Here in Frederick County.
Never-
So we don't have to cross out certain
Oh.
plantations and things. I just want to bring up Licksville. Thank you.
No, thank you for bringing up Licksville. When I was little, and I knew my grandmother was from Licksville. There were all kinds of jokes that I won't even go into, but you can imagine what little kids would say about a place called Licksville. But understanding now, because I've done a context study for AARCH, where I wrote the history of African Americans in Frederick County, I remember doing that research and finding things like, how did I not know that when I grew up there? How was I not aware that this was a thing? I learned from doing research, within the last 5 years. Did you want to say something, Ms. Harris?
Yeah, before we get away from my Point Rock Cemetery, my ancestors are buried there too. And my great-great-grandfather, and there's another great, was born in 1782.
Wow.
And he is buried in that cemetery because he lived to be old man.
Wow. See, this is the importance of this.
His name?
Yeah.
His name was Richard Harris.
Okay.
Well, that was Richard's father. I would say Richard and Emily Harris, and there's an Ed Harris too there.
Is that my great grandfather? Yeah, my great grandfather. Yeah.
Oh, who are you?
You know how many meetings we've been in together, Miss Harris? I'm Michelle Wright. I'm Iva's daughter, Iva Wright's daughter,
Really?
and Rose's niece.
Really?
Yes.
And you'll-
You know how many we've been in 500 meetings together, ma'am.
Yeah, I know we have, but I really know you.
Yeah, because I left Frederick because I just didn't. It was not a friendly environment to me.
Right, yeah.
You know, and then Rose sucked me back in.
Yeah.
We all know how Rose
Small world.
But anyway, Rose sucked me back in because I'm a historian, I'm a trained historian. And she's like, well, you're from Frederick, you should
Yeah.
be doing this research. So that's how I got pulled
Yeah.
back in. But I'm in
Mr.
Frederick all the
Parker was
time.
Mr. Parker was my, I was in the first grade, he was in third grade. He was my sweetheart. He didn't know it.
I didn't know we were going to get in. I didn't know we were going to be sharing. All right, one last question. We're going to move on. Yeah, go ahead.
No.
Yes.
In Route 85 in Buckystown,
Yeah.
I was searching for a cemetery that they talked about needing restoration. Well, I found the placard out in front of what was a church that was built in 1924. I was just 1824. I was just telling you.
Okay.
And all right, so there's a placard out there. Well, up the street there is a bed and breakfast. And my understanding is that the bed and breakfast removed the tombstones from the site and placed them all in the back. And I have pictures of it. And I was out there with Mr. Gordon from the AARCH Society.
Yeah.
And all the tombstones are located in a corner back there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are they piled up or?
They're placed, they had concrete and they got some of them standing up, some of them they're military, the big one that's just laying down on the ground. But they removed them from their final resting places and placed them in the back because they didn't want, the bed and breakfast didn't want people, this is what I'm being told, didn't want people to see a cemetery next door.
And this, unfortunately, the story is told over and over.
But
and over
the
again
placard
throughout
is
the
there
country.
identifying the site.
Did we know this?
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah.
Yeah, I always have to ask Rose because Rose knows it.
Yeah, I belong to her too. I'm her nephew.
We're probably all related.
Yeah.
You know, that's
Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah.
You know, coming from Frederick County, you
Yeah.
know, we call Baltimore small, but Frederick, you
Yeah.
know, is a whole nother level.
Yeah, I had to get that off my chest because I dislocated.
This is why we're here. This is the type of information that we're trying to gather and document, and the fact that the government and other people recognize the importance of this now and are putting money behind that is important, and we have to take advantage of that and keep the ball rolling and just not let it stop. We have to keep pushing forward. And all of this stuff, this is why the community is so important. This is not, you know, people in the ivory towers who are historians that are doing this. This is each and every one of you who are here, who are residents in Frederick County. You're the ones that know these stories. And you're the ones that we need to make sure that these things are recorded.
We just did a documentary for Hope Hill United Methodist Church.
Oh, okay.
Coming out of the Claggett Center.
I think I've heard about that.
Yes. So
I would like to see
AAA
that.
Visual is who did the.
Okay, all right. We have to share that. We have to chat. Next public meeting. There you go. That's it, Barbara. All right. I don't want to end the conversation. I think this dialogue is good. I think that so many people want to share. This is what we want. We didn't want it to be something that was isolated and kind of put up here, you know, in an archive somewhere. It's more important that all of us get engaged in this. So I want to introduce Michael Hughes. Gentlemen, we've been trying to have a cup of coffee for the last, 2 years now?
I'm very thirsty.
So, Michael's the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer of Frederick County, and he's going to explain how the Recovering Identity Project is connected to what his work is. So.
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate it. Not being from Frederick County, I don't think I'm kidding anyone in the room. I may be the only person that might apply to, but I wanted to speak with you not so much about the particulars, of Frederick County's rich history, which I'm learning so much about as I moved here about 3 years ago. But it's simply about the value of this project and how it does intersect with the work that we're doing in Frederick County government and also equity and inclusion. We live in a data-driven society. We talk about that all the time. And data is critical. And data is important. And data is valuable. We make decisions around it. So much money is spent around data. Data. And I operate that way as well. And data is critical and important. But there's a however. Data tends to leave us out sometimes, historically. I remember I was fortunate enough to be raised by, my father was a reader, and he actually had his undergraduate degree in history, so he had a lot of books around. I learned a lot of information. I could tell you when I was a young man how many people were enslaved when the Civil War ended, how many people traveled from, Virginia was the largest state in terms of moving slaves out after the Nat Turner Rebellion. All the slaves that had to march all the way to the Louisiana market. I could talk to you about that. I could talk to you about how many people were lost in the Middle Passage. I knew all this facts and all this information, and it was important to me. But then one day, I came to realize that there's more to this story. There's more to the story. And if you think about it, we are, as people, as African Americans in particular, we are an oral culture. Our lives are wrapped up in storytelling. Our story sometimes is the data. And that can really get lost sometimes in things. And I love the idea of naming this the Identity Project. Because it makes it personal. Because they could have called it, identifying this. That's just a process. If you talk about identifying something. But when you talk about identity, that's when it starts to be a little bit more personal. I have my own experience that way. This would have been in about 1999. I was living up in the Philadelphia area at the time. I was driving to work. And I was listening to NPR. I flipped the channel to get to NPR. And they were playing something on the radio. You could tell it was an old recording. Couldn't hardly hear it good. I pulled over to the parking lot. I arrived at work and I turned the volume up a bit. In my 1986, I believe it was Honda Prelude. And I turned it up and I was listening. And I couldn't believe what I heard. I really had an emotional, personal, life-changing experience for me at that moment. I'll never forget it. And when I found out, I was listening to voice recordings of the formerly enslaved people. Mm-hmm. First, it's not possible, right? That was a long time ago. They didn't have the technology to do that. How could this even be true? It must be something different. I'm listening. I'm being drawn in. I'm hearing these folks talk about their lives and their experience. And some of the stories they told were horrible. Just broke your heart to hear it. But more importantly for me at the moment, they became human beings. They had identity now. They were people that had lives. They weren't just numbers. They had names. They would talk about each other interpersonally. And sometimes they would use language that would be offensive to us today to hear them, how they refer to themselves. But they were humans. And all at once, all those facts that I had in my head became a little bit less important. Now, they were important, but this became more important for me. And from that point on, I've been a bit obsessed with wanting to tell the story of my people. So I love this project and what is happening. Because it brings out the humanity of things. Just to share a few things with you, I was asked to share some things about what's going on in Frederick County government. I want to share with you the vision for the Office of Equity and Inclusion. Because it speaks to, I think, what this project is getting at least a great part of what it is getting at. We've envisioned a Frederick County where each of us is equally valued for our humanity that we share. And that we recognize that our destinies are inextricably intertwined. That's the fact of our humanity. In addition to that, next slide. We envision a Frederick County where everyone is continually growing to become more culturally competent. As each of us thoughtfully examines our own culture, and as we actively engage with one another with civility and respect to work through our differences. Culturally competent. I was in a meeting at county government probably about a year and a half ago at this point, and it was one of our senior executives. And in the meeting, I mentioned cultural competence. He looked at me and said, "What is that?" I said, "Well, think about it for a second." He thought about it. He said, "What is that?" I'm like, cultural competence. He couldn't put it together. So this is how far back we are from where we should be too often about being culturally competent. But cultural competence, if you want to gain in a gathering, especially I'm going to speak to those that are outside of the African American culture, is first examine your own culture. Like, I think February ought to be White History Month, to be honest with you. Because that's really where you can't separate our stories from each other, can you? You can't separate them. They are intertwined together. As we said a moment ago on this slide, and they're strictly intertwined with one another. So these stories, your story is my story, and my story is your story. They are tied up together. We've got to be culturally competent to understand this. Now, fortunately, unfortunately, the reality is, I grew up having to live and know white culture, white history, white this, white that. I have to operate that way. But some folks have been able to get away without that. But now it's time to be culturally competent about these things. And this is what some of the things we're driving at Frederick County Government's Office of Equity and Inclusion. And in addition to that, we envision a Frederick County where we learn from our past and work collectively to ensure that those who have been historically oppressed are provided with opportunities for success and position to maintain their dignity and self-respect without opposition. Now, folks have fought long and hard through opposition to have this dignity and respect. We're fortunate enough to live on the backs of them and what they suffer from. But even still today, we'll still struggle to really own our own dignity and self-respect. On a regular basis, it's oftentimes attempted to take it away from us. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes just by default, because the systems have been set up to operate that way too often. And so when we talk about this cultural competence and inclusion not just talks about today. This is language we use. We talk about diversity, we talk about data and all those things. We talk about inclusion, we talk about it today and being inclusive and all those things. But this project is about including us in history, including us in the story that's told about Frederick County and Frederick County's people, including us and our valuable contribution that we have made in Frederick County. So in Frederick County government, what we're doing in terms of operating in some of these matters, and when it comes to boots on the ground, is that we're creating affinity groups so that people that working for, right now we're focusing internally. We feel like we need to get our house in order before we can be effective, because we're supposed to be serving the community before we can be effective in doing that, to get our own house in order. So some of the things we're doing, we're creating affinity groups so that folks have a space and a place and a voice. They really don't need a voice, they just need a microphone. They've got a voice. So that they can tell their stories. They can create a Frederick County government that represents them. And our office also provides ombuds services to our folks. We have 2,700 employees. And we operate with an open door on certain days of the week. And we get some interesting stories that come in. But people have been longing to tell their story about their experience at Frederick County government. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not so great. So our office has become the place where everybody, they don't go to HR. They come to us. And we sometimes walk them over to HR. But they start with us because we've gained the trust, because they know that we care about them and their humanity that way. And we also are directly involved in many complaints of discrimination as well. But sometimes, once again, they'll come to us before they go to HR about it, because historically, we have a new HR director now who's working to change all of that. But historically, HR did not have the reputation as a place that looked after people and cared about people the way they should. So we're working with HR to rebuild their reputation and then moving forward with things very well that way. But we are really focused on making sure that we are helping our people, all of our people, not just people that look like me, all of our people, so that their stories can be told. Because once again, we're all tied in this together. So thank you for the opportunity to share today.
Thank you so much, Michael. I think the work that you're doing is incredibly important. It reminds me of some of the conversations I have with my students. And one of the things that we often talk about, and the gentleman, he's back there, was saying that it's no mistake that I didn't learn about, Governor Thomas Johnson High School and the big house that was right there on that property. It's no mistake that this history has not been included. This is done on purpose. It is intentional. And what I see happening now in history through historiography is the kind of the word that you hear in a lot of conferences and a lot of places is the word agency, providing agency for African Americans, making sure that the story is told through the African American lens, through that perspective, in a voice. And it's something I teach my students, the difference between being the object of study and being the subject of study. And if you understand what that means, being the object of the study is you're objectified. You may be being studied. They may be a study of African Americans in World War II, But it's an objectified study where you're not seeing it from their perspective, from their point of view, and you're looking at it from the outside in. That historiography needs to be questioned. And it needs to be from the point of view of the people themselves. Us. We need to be telling the stories for ourselves, about ourselves, by ourselves. And that needs to be honored, because oral history hasn't been honored historically. Only thing if you get a degree in any kind of history in an American college, it's a very Eurocentric view of what history should be. It should be recorded. But if you were systematically prohibited from reading, writing, etc., all of that, you couldn't record your history. The only history that was recorded was wealthy white men. So what we are having to do now is to go and look at that same data, that same information that's there, and re-examine it through a different lens. It still may be the same piece of history, but we have to do that. We see that being done at Rosemont now. We see that being done in a whole lot of different places. At Catoctin, that story is now being told through the individuals themselves, where they're no longer objects. They are subjects of study. They're not being objectified anymore. And so that becomes an important history, and that the humanity and the individualism and understanding that this is why we don't use the word slave anymore. We say these people who were enslaved. Something was being done to them. That was not their identity. They were enslaved. So it becomes an important piece that we need to remember. And with that, I want to bring up one of my favorite people, Elizabeth Comer from the Catoctin Historical Society, and she's going to discuss the work that was done, the tremendous amount of work that was done on phase 1 of recovering identity. So,
Thank you, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be here this evening. Hello, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Comer. I am proud to say that I'm the current president of the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society. And back in 2020, I was writing a grant for the Maryland Historical Trust to do recovering identity for what we call the Greater Furnace Lands, which is 12,000 plus acres of the industrial complex of Catoctin Furnace. And I got a phone call from Amanda saying Frederick County is writing a grant for the same project, but for the entire northern part of the county. And I was like, okay. We can't go up against each other, obviously. So we're going to join forces, and we're going to make this a much larger project than the 12,000 plus acres. We're going to look at the entirety of northern Frederick County in recovering identity. So we want to share tonight a little bit of our success, and of course let you know what our challenges were and what our issues were, and what we learned, what are the protocols that we were able to put together for this, what I consider a successful project. And I have to tell you, and I'm probably going to get a little emotional about this, lack of sleep and that sort of thing, but I've managed more than 200, I've served as the principal investigator on more than 200 projects in my career as a historian and an archaeologist. And this one is by far the most important thing I've ever done in my life. This and the DNA project, its sister project at Catoctin Furnace. And I'm following the legacy of my parents, who realized the value of Catoctin Furnace 50 years ago when they founded the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society. They recognized that the African American story was not being told, and that was the story of Catoctin Furnace. And so we are following in their footsteps, and I'm very proud to be able to do that. Northern Frederick County we defined as everything north of and including Lewistown. We were very practical about this because we wanted to do quantifying data that was quantifiable as well as qualitative. And that meant we wanted to follow the census and the election districts for the North County so that we could very carefully compare numbers and compare data with and be accurate, if you will, in those election districts. So if you see the map behind me, it shows you northern Frederick County as we defined it, northern Lewistown, west to the Washington County line, east to the Monocacy River, and the now Carroll County line, and of course north to the Pennsylvania line. So this is the northern Frederick County recovering identity area. I grew up there from the age of 4, near on a farm near the town of Criggerstown. So I kind of knew that Frederick County, northern Frederick County, did not have a very large African American population. And our research, our historic context study, put together by Edie Wallace, has shown that by 1910, virtually all African Americans were absent from northern Frederick County, with the exception of a few families who stayed around Emmitsburg, connected with the Catholic Church and the Catholic colleges, good jobs, and lots of, that was the opportunity that was there. And then also the goldfish farming industry in Lewistown. Eli Wolf was known as one of the top 5 goldfish farmers in Frederick County in the census of goldfish farmers. So these were things that we were finding out in recovering identity, but yet, again, the population of African Americans in northern Frederick County, which was the largest in the county. James Johnson and his brothers at Catoctin Furnace were, in fact, the largest slaveholders in the county. So where did all these people go? And that was one of the questions that we had, that we still have. Next slide, please. So what did we do in Recovering Identity Phase 1? Edie produced an excellent, comprehensive historic context for the North County. And then our product was very specific, if you call it bricks and mortar. We were to produce Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties forms, frankly, as many as we could, and that is what we did. So the funds that we had for Recovering Identity Phase 1, a total of $75,000, went in their entirety to 3 individuals: Edie Wallace as our historian, John Murphy as our architectural historian, and Alexandra McDougall as our critical content reader. And they so deserved all those funds for the work that they did. So, pardon me, could you go back a minute, Bo? Thank you. So what I want to talk about is our methodology, and I do have to kind of turn because my little screen here doesn't show me the full image. We looked at historic maps. We looked at those in order to find extant buildings in the North County. We looked at census and land records, of course, critically important for finding African American families and individuals, locations of businesses, and that sort of record. We did so many oral histories. How many times did we sit at a kitchen table getting photos, hearing stories, and over again as the story unfolded, as we had more questions, knock, 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 another question, can you help us answer it? And the answer was always yes. And then, of course, the architectural survey, finding the extant structures in northern Frederick County that are still there, that tell us of the presence of the African American population in the North County. On the right side of your slide, you see one page of, generally there are 40 to 50 page Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties forms. We have now many, many of these for the North County. I'll be showing you a list in a moment. They are not just a story and a description, physical description of a structure and its history, but they contain unbelievably valuable genealogical information for families within Frederick County, because Maryland V ran hundreds of title searches. And within those title searches, of course, we have the families. And that did not include structures that were rented that we were also looking for, and places of business. Next slide, please. So what were our issues encountered? This is something that we want to share for Recovering Identity Phase 2, because over the 2.5, now actually nearly 3 years, we had many stops and starts because it was frankly difficult. Maryland, at one point, we just started running Maryland's an Angel title searches on every structure that we could find extant that was on the 1868 Sanborn maps and bond maps, because we couldn't find them any other way. The records were so sparse. And so it yielded a couple. It was a great deal of work for Maryland to run all those title searches, but it worked. So buildings associated with African American history in northern Frederick County have largely been demolished. This was something that we realized fairly early on, and so I said, well, we cannot lose all of this data, all these data that we're gathering. So we are going to produce a second part of the context report that we named the memory landscape. And the memory landscape is enormous in northern Frederick County. And yet without that memory landscape, we would not understand the full scope of the African American experience in the north part of the county. Buildings associated with African American history that remain are often highly modified. This is because as we have moved into modernity in the 21st century, the real estate in the northern part of the county was actually quite a bit cheaper than in other places. So people were moving in, purchasing these vernacular structures and modifying them to a large extent. And so that was a challenge as well, the highly modified structures. And then often historic buildings associated with African American history were not actually owned by African Americans. They were rented. And so that is a difficulty in the paper trail because we cannot use the census, the land records. We can often we do use the census records, but census records, you can't really walk in the footsteps of the census enumerator. You cannot be absolutely certain that as you see a structure, maybe the census enumerator did go from to the next door structure, but you can't be sure of that. So again, a very great challenge. Next slide, please. This is a list of the Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties that we have, that John Murphy has put together with the team. And what I wanted to show you on the map on the right are the areas that have a concentration of those structures. And then in addition, we're very proud to say that we have, as a bonus for Recovering Identity Phase 2, we expanded the National Register of Historic District of Emmitsburg, which previously was only the main street, i.e. the white part of Emmitsburg. Now the National Register of Historic District, as it moves through the process, it's not quite complete, there's several more steps, but it will include, it does include the very important African American enclave of Lincoln Avenue, which was not just a series of dwellings. There was a cemetery, there was a school. It was a very active, very vibrant African American community in Emmitsburg, and is now part of that recognized national, or will be very soon, part of that National Register of Historic District. So if you look to the left of the slide, you see some of the structures that have been very carefully and very completely described, both their architecture, their history, their genealogy, everything that we were able to come to put together to learn about those structures. These are not part of the memory landscape. They are structures that still stand. And so I'll point out a couple. Pattersonville, the Patterson, Robert Patterson home up on the mountain. Fabulous story. Robert Patterson, I call him the man. He and his wife started a school, a mulatto school. They were, frankly, not treated very well by Frederick County Board of Education, and they would complain that, you know, they were using more wood than the other schools in the county. Well, anybody that ever goes up on Catoctin Mountain knows it's colder up there, and the temperature is maybe 8 to 10 degrees colder than anywhere else in the winter. So of course they were using more wood. Give me a break. So the people, the Pattersons left. They went to Pennsylvania, but we found them, and we have a very vibrant Robert Patterson descendant working group that we are working with. And then another that I'll point out, the Eli Wolf House in Lewistown, Patricia Snowden's family, fabulous history of goldfish farming. I mentioned that already, but who knew? When I read articles in the paper about goldfish farming in Frederick County, they don't mention the African American population as part of that, and yet Patricia has shared with us her memories of the beautiful goldfish and her mother helping get the goldfish into the cans and sorting the goldfish, and it's just a fabulous part of African American history in Frederick County. Next. So the memory landscapes, really, I love these. I hate that they're gone, but I love that we found them and we can now share them, and they are back. They may be a memory, but a memory is important. So even though the structure isn't extant, we know it's there now, and you also can see that it's there now as you drive through. You know, I'll never look at Northern Frederick County the same again now that I've been a part of this amazing project. So the migrant camp in Thurmont, when I was at Thurmont Elementary School, I remember African American children coming in at the canning season and the picking season, and then disappearing very quickly, going back to Belle Grove, Florida, by the way. So we need to follow up. We have many follow-up questions, and one of them is, you know, are there families still in Belle Grove that remember being in Thurmont, and what do they remember, and what can that add to our story? The migrant camp was by the railroad track, just on the other side of Altamont Avenue at the Weller Cemetery. Again, it's a memory landscape because the structures are no longer there. The burying ground in Lewistown was the closest land that was not owned by the Johnsons. So this is our working hypothesis, when African Americans were moving away from the industry of Catoctin furnace, where did they settle? They settled in Lewistown. Very vibrant community, a school, a church, numerous houses, a burying ground. Now, there's one African American resident in Lewistown, but it was a very vibrant community, and that is part of our memory landscape. The Adam Lee House in the mountain community, inside that house is a log cabin. And the foundation, this is one of those buildings that I have located and was so excited, and the architectural historians come in and say, that doesn't have integrity anymore. And I'm like, wait a minute, we're not losing this house. This house is African American, and we must record it. It must be part of our history. And so that house, if you drive up Annandale Road, again, a wonderful, vibrant African American enclave, just connected with Mount St. Mary's University College, now University, on Annandale Road. And the Gem Cinema. When I was interviewing Willie Van Bracker, he's like, well, they wanted me to sit in the back in the Gem Cinema in Emmitsburg, but I wanted to go to the movies with my friends, and I said, no, I'm going to sit with my friends. And he integrated the Gem Cinemas. We have all of these oral histories that are now recorded, and they tell us about Northern Frederick County. Next up. So what did we do? We did MIHP forms for the standing structures with African American Association that retain integrity. That's not our word. That's the architectural history, the sort of mantra that one needs for a Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties form or a National Register form. Does it have integrity? And in this case, we have a number of, I think we're up to 18 or 20 structures that we found in Northern Frederick County that do retain that integrity. But then the memory landscape are standing structures with African American Association that have been heavily modified, like the Lee home, or they're sites that where buildings once stood, or they're historic cemeteries and burial grounds associated with African Americans. Next slide. So, the team. This was the dream team. No question. I mean, we put thousands of hours into this, and it has been worth every moment. I just want to point out that it was funded by a non-capital grant from the Maryland Historical Trust and a CLG grant, again, through the Maryland Historical Trust. AARCH Society was huge to help us get this project finished. Of course, Amanda and Bo in their office. And I want to do a special thank you to Rick Smith. We lost him earlier this year. He was a real champion of this project, spent hours and hours and hours doing research and helping us, especially on Annandale Road. We have a special fondness of that community, and what we call the mountain community of Annandale Road outside of Emmitsburg. Of course, the Kentucky Furnace, the residents, Marilyn, who ran hundreds of title searches and never complained. Well, at least didn't complain to me. Edie Wallace did a fabulous job with the context, and I encourage you. Everything is on our website, and I think it's linked to your. Please take a moment to look at these things. They have changed the understanding and the history as it will be looked at in the future of Northern Frederick County. Alexander McDougall, who's now up at Columbia University getting her PhD. She was our critical content reader. Michelle, of course. Saying Amanda again. John Murphy was our principal architectural historian out of California, but is from Maryland. His family is from Maryland and has deep roots here, and was fabulous. Edward Quinter translated the Moravian Diaries for us. They were funded by another project, but they were hugely helpful, again, in understanding what the Moravians were very good about keeping their diaries and writing letters, and they talked at length about African Americans in North County. My firm, EAC Archaeology, I had an amazing group of people that were able to help me. Rob Warner, Ben Fischler, Patrick Kim, to name just a few. Michael Brandon, one of our interns, and then of course the Maryland Historical Trust architectural historians. So we loved it. We're not quite finished. It's a fabulous project, and I'm really glad to share it with you even briefly tonight. We do plan to do a much more extensive presentation about the North County, so stay tuned for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. I just want to say, growing up in Frederick, and those of you who know, it's like nobody went up there, up north. You know, it was just like one of those things like, black folks, there's no black folks up there, be careful, that's Klan country. Liz helped me understand and appreciate that history, working, the work that I did, and just be aware. Take a trip up there. Especially go to the Museum of the Metalworker? Ironworker, I'm sorry. If you haven't seen the unveiling of the reconstructed faces and just the history of the enslaved African Americans who worked in the iron industry up there, and just the work that's been done, it's something that is, it made me rethink my preconceived notions about that region of Frederick County, and I want to thank you for that. But another thing that you said that I could segue into Bo's presentation is the importance of memory. And memory has not always been honored, and I know like Dean's like, oh, she's going to say this again, or I know Rose is. It's going to be like, here she goes. The difference between memory and history, the discipline of history and memory. And so much of the important things that we need to know about African Americans is rooted in memory. And that's the importance of these oral histories. Oral histories challenge the dominant narrative. There's always a dominant narrative of what's going on. It's that narrative that has been told from that narrow white male land-owning privileged perspective that just marginalized everybody else. And what oral histories do is they challenge it, and they add more layers to understanding what happened. So when you hear the dominant story, we always hear that. But the memory can say, well, that's not the way I remember it. That's still valid. We need to learn in the discipline of history to honor both the history and the memory. And the project that Bo is going to share with you in just a minute is about those oral histories and some of the other work that he's doing. So Bo's going to show a video first, and then he's going to talk a little bit about the oral histories that's being done in the Phase 2 part of the Recovering Identity Project. So.
Okay, I started out at Downs Elementary School. It's located on 7th View Road, and I guess the address now is Adamstown, Maryland, but at that time it was Downs. It was a, we had 2 classrooms. We were privileged because we had indoor plumbing, and we also had a office. When I was at Downs, Mrs. Passmore, in one room there was 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade, and Mr. Brown had 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. And unfortunately now, Mrs. Passmore and Mr. Brown are all deceased. They're deceased. And I knew that at Downs, even though the law said separate but equal, we were separate but it wasn't equal. We never got new books. We got books that came from the white school that may have been used or sold or whatever, but that's what we got there. But one thing though about Downs Elementary School, one thing about Mrs. Pastor and Mr. Brown, they made you learn. They made you learn. And they saw to it that you learn. Mrs. Pastor, for example, of course, she taught the curriculum, but you know every day in school we had to help a cleanliness check. Show us your ears, show us your hands. You came in to clean. You know, look behind your ears. You know, ear check, hand check, nail check, right? Because we were supposed to respect ourselves. And when you respect yourself, you just don't come out any way, shape, or form. No, they weren't concerned about our clothes or how our clothes looked. But it's like your body, keeping yourself clean and fresh. And they instilled that in us. Mm-hmm. And again, it was all black school. And the way we went to school, like some of the kids in school, you would have to look at and double take. Are they black? Because we didn't know, but some way the government knew. I stayed at Downs grades 1 through 4. And then in the 5th grade, they opened Urbana Elementary School. And so a lot of us went to Urbana. Downs remained open for, I think, 2 more years until they opened Carroll Manor. And then once they opened Carroll Manor, Downs closed. And that was the last colored school in Frederick County closed.
Now, were there any teachers that stood out to you the most in your time at Downs or even at Urbana?
I think for me though, I think one thing that when you think back about it, when we went to Urbana and even a couple of years later when we went to West Frederick, I think integration was, we had a culture shock, you know, getting adjusted to things. And I think a lot of white teachers have some little shock too. Because I don't think they realized that even though we were of a different color, we were still the same children. And it's like, and I think for a while the thing was like, well, how do I treat them? Well, the same way you treat the other ones, you know. It's like, I think that they were fearful of how they were supposed to treat us. And how different it would be. But I think they learned and realized that we were really different. We just had maybe skin tones were different, hair was, but we were the same children, you know. And then I think it took a while for them to understand us and us understanding them.
It's an adjustment for
Correct.
everybody.
For everyone, yeah. And like, and the shock to them that our parents became involved. They joined the PCA. They volunteered for it because I know at Urbana, they always had a strawberry festival. Parents volunteered for that. They were just, the black parents were just as engaged in their children's education as the white parents were. And they were into our parents at the time, because of what they had experienced, they were making sure that we succeeded, okay? Like, Daddy, I think he completed at that time, he completed the 8th grade. But Daddy knew how to read and write. And Daddy made sure that we always went to college. All, you know, the four of us. My oldest sister was enrolled in college, unfortunately. She died in September, when she was supposed to go to college. But the mom and dad made sure that mom graduated from Lincoln High School in 1947, but they made sure that all of us were educated. They made sure of that. And Daddy's mantra that even my grandchildren repeat now. They call my dad Pop Pop, and they go, I know what Pop Pop said, books before boys. That's what Daddy taught children. He taught his granddaughters, and for the grandsons, he switched it around a bit, you know. That's the Daddy's mantra, books before boys. And that stuck with you forever. And it's still sticking with my granddaughters.
When I came to school as a young boy, I guess they knew it was quick to after really. Now I remember Coach told me he said something, he's going to play basketball. We did everything because it was big basketball. And it was gym classes, I guess we noticed something. I had some problems with this part of this, so I joined the team. That was one of my highlights in my high school, playing baseball, captain of the team, traveling different areas. In that time, we traveled to all black schools in the area. And we always went, a couple of parents always took us, and they stayed. Some of the parents went to the rest of transportation. And we went as far as Fremont, West Virginia, a little school, a Colorado, we played in Martinsburg, we played in Rockville, things like that. And what happened after the game, we stayed in people's homes. Of course, we didn't have, hotels. So that's where it was, the whole town we were playing. They made the preparations early, and they took to the Olympics and they took care of us. I remember in Kamla, we went in and we had set up, we could eat in the bus station, so we would have the meals at the bus station. Then we go on and play basketball, and then the next morning, this night we go to people's home. So I didn't think it was a big learning experience for all, but it's not up to you all right. Of course, at the time, it was mostly places specifically.
Sorry about the audio quality on that last one. Checking on the TV screen, but we still have the MP4 saved, and it's you can hear it very well when you listen to it on a computer. And we also have the transcripts for all these oral histories that we're still working on finalizing. First, I want to thank Barbara Thompson and Rose Cheney for helping connect so many of us, or connect the colleges to these interviewees. We're planning on working with 3 colleges for the Recovering Identity Phase 2. We're going to work with, or we worked with Hood College for this one. We're working with Mount St. Mary's this semester, and we're working with Frederick Community College. We're supposed to produce 15 oral histories for the grant. We've already produced 6, and I hope that we produce significantly more than 15. And these oral histories will become a part of AARCH Society's archives once they are completed. If anyone is interested or believes they know someone who would be interested in participating in the Oral History Project, some people here who already have, like right over there, and Mary Harrison from they can say I hope it was a good experience and we were able to capture a lot of their stories. And yes, sir.
Are you limited to 15, you say?
Absolutely not. No, 15 is just the minimum that we have to work towards. If we get 50, I'll be just as happy.
Great.
Yeah, and this is not just personal stories. We do accept stories that are passed down through your family. This is not just about your life, it's about your family's life. So please, if you are interested in participating in any way, I have an oral history form that you can fill out for contact information, and I'll reach out to you. My information is also available on the Frederick County website, and you can reach this email behind me as well. I'd like to introduce Carol Wright, who's going to do a brief talk about Patrick Ambush today.
Go brief.
She'll try to keep it brief. And about her ancestor, Patrick Ambush. Turn it over to her. And if you have any questions, feel free to talk to me after the meeting.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I usually like to start to say my name is Caroline Ambush Wright. I am the daughter of Floyd and Shirley Johnson Ambush. I'm the granddaughter of John Fillmore and Mary Leone Ambush. I'm the great-granddaughter of Charles Jonas Ambush and I forgot his name now. Johnny May Williams Ambush. And great-great-great-granddaughter of Frederick Ambush and his wife, Sarah Jackson Ambush, and going back to Robert Ambush and his wife, whose name was Matilda Martha or Margaret. I can trace my ancestry back right now to 1803, and they were enslaved in Montgomery County. And this we know because in 1868, for example, the states that didn't succeed from the government contacted the federal government and said, hey, look, we didn't succeed, we didn't leave you, so how are you going to compensate us for losing our whaler, or enslaved? So they took the slave census in which the federal government, they had the enslaved, slaver's name, the enslaved, and any description that they would use about them. And that's how I found all the slavers' names and the ones that were on this farm. Now, contrary to popular belief, all the enslavers that he had, no one took his last name. No one took his last name. So when you hear these stories about all the enslavers, the enslaved took the name of the slave, and they said, no, we didn't. No, we didn't. In spite of whatever, we had our own identity. that we maintained and that we kept. So I'm finding that one of the slaves, they call it the slave statistic, Patrick Ambush left with the military. And that was documented. And one of my cousins gave me a little tintype picture of Patrick that the family cherishes of Frederick in his outfit or his uniform holding a flute. So we're just assuming he was a musician in the Union Army. My mother and sister and I have also ventured to the National Archives where we got copies of Patrick's muster papers when he was released from the military. Patrick was also, one thing about his ambushes, then there are a lot of us up in here, okay? Yep. We are a very resilient people, very resilient. Patrick, though, let's say, was quote-unquote freed, was in 1863-64, but by 1883, 20 years later, that man owned property. Yeah. That man owned property. Yeah. And the records show on the deeds that Patrick bought and sold property. And he was enslaved. But an ancestor told me that Patrick was he wanted to learn so bad that he walked to school with his children. He wanted to learn to read and write. And he did. And because of that, he was one of the co-founders of a community that's now called Pleasant View. Yep. And there he purchased property, and they built the first school for colored children, and also the church in Pleasant View. All history dictates, and I'm trying to find whether this is true or not. They say that Patrick was engaged in a poker game, and here goes the white folks didn't know that he could read and write, and he skunked them and won the property. But that was part of the pact. But that's part of the history that I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to research to find out if that's actually true or just family folklore. I can't think it's folklore, but I'm not going to disrupt anything. I'm going to stick to the story. Okay. But I can say though that from what I have found, Patrick is Patrick is buried in Fairview Cemetery. And his father, the Robert Ambush, to the folks at the Point of Rock Cemetery, I'm trying to find out more about him because his obituary states that he is buried there, but I just don't know where his grave is. And before I sit down and tell you that I was raised, or Patrick was raised, we were raised in the southern part of Frederick County. Our neighborhood, our community is called Della. Della is on this side of the Monocacy River, and it's still there now. It's not as thriving as it used to be, but it's still there. If you go over the bridge into across the Monocacy, then you'll be in the community of Greenfield. With two distinct neighborhoods. So I'm from Della born, Della bred, Della raised, and still proud of Della, okay? Now, anything was about Patrick Ambush, and we're so proud of him and what he has accomplished and what he did, okay? And again, we're still doing one thing about when you research, as the researchers say, you hit so many brick walls, but you can't go over them, you can't go under them. We're trying to go around them to go under and over to get things done, okay? Thank you.
That's my first cousin, her father and my mother, brothers and sisters.
And then we'll throw in Michelle's family.
Yes.
We're all related.
Just how many ambushes are there?
A lot.
A lot of us.
A lot of it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And my grandmother is an ambush. So and it's funny. I ran into Carol at in Baltimore at the Maryland Historical Society. She's like, you know I'm your cousin, right? I said, yes, I know you're my cousin. So there's a lot of ambushes here, and there's also my family's Dorsey. Okay. Emerson, Warren, Dorsey. Those are the Dorseys. So it was
an ambush.
Yeah, and then my grandmother was Ambush Harris, and yeah, all of them. You want to add something, Rose?
And even the lady who was in Lewistown, and Ambush.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Right.
Anybody else? She's an Ambush show.
And every few years there's a really nice Ambush family reunion.
Yeah.
And where different parts of the family from different sections come together, and we learn about each other. So.
We had about 100-page reunion booklet on the last one.
Yes.
She heads it up.
Yeah.
She's got an award for it too, for doing a reunion booklet.
Well, just, and adding on to what my cousin has said, when you do family research, even though I've never met them, you get to know them. Things become more personal.
Yeah.
I looked for years trying to find information about Dylan's name was Robert Ambush. I'm surprised my children like the library at all, because this was the day of Michael Fish, Michael Film. We had to sit there and go, and we were there. But you don't know how many tears I shed. I didn't find anything about his life, but I found his obituary when he died. And it was like, here, finally, this man received some recognition, not in his life, but in his death. And I was able to connect with him, like, oh my gosh, I found you. I found something about my family. I found something. So when you do it, it does become extremely personal, and you become attached to. Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you, Barbara.
And that's the beauty. And I know a lot of people in this room are doing research on their own family and research on other things. And it fleshes out, the sort of like the flat family trees, which are, we need to have. I mean, you need to know that history in your family tree, but to flesh out the hopes, the dreams, the loves, the fears, the whatever, the humanity, as you were saying earlier, just the humanity of these people is so rewarding. To just see the sacrifices and all of those things is such a rewarding thing. So this project is so important, and I'm so glad you're here. And so I think everybody in this room does have a story, and everyone in this room could give an oral history about something. I try to encourage my mom. My mom's kind of shy and doesn't like to do that. She's just like, no, I can't. Now I'm mad that you even said that. But she's a wealth of information. She has so much to share, and I know that there's so many other people in this room that know so many stories, the same thing. And we can't forget these, because if they're not in the official record, in the dominant narrative, then when people do pass on, we lose a whole library with them. We lose so much with them. Yeah.
There may be a lot of people here that have their histories, but I don't. I am one who does not. My last name is Fawcett, and there's not a lot of history about the Fawcettts in this area, and we're here. So I don't know many Ambush. My grandma was an Ambush, but that doesn't give me anything.
Yeah.
And in the Fawcett family, I have my Uncle Gene and the family from Newmarket, but that's it.
Newmarket.
Yes.
One thing I would suggest, and we have some genealogists, I think, in the room, but one thing I would suggest is to think about different spellings, because different spellings of the same name going back, like for example, my grandfather was Dorsey. We come from the Dorsey family, but that's not the original spelling. Dorsey. It would have been D''Arcey. And so you need to look at possible different spellings. I'm not sure of the spelling of your last name.
Fossett.
But there's other ways to spell it.
It is.
You might want to consider thinking about have you tried to do research? Are you trying to?
Originally, it comes from England.
Right.
And so it was spelled like 5 different ways.
Yeah, so you know about the difference.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's always a struggle, because things would be just switched around. I mean, any historian knows when you go to do research, you have to look at so many different ways. Spelling, different ways that it might have been heard, especially like the census, because if the census taker heard one thing and wrote it down, I know I've looked at my grandfather's census from 1930 and it's just wrong.
The census
The names are wrong, his age is wrong, everything's wrong.
The census that I looked up still spells it FOS as ETU.
How far back?
Back into the 1938. I have, but Decatur Dorsey is a person that
D-O-R-S-E-Y?
Yeah. And he's my
Civil War.
fourth grade grandfather, and he received a Medal of Honor.
So you've done some research.
I've done some stuff.
Yeah, okay. I thought maybe.
You said Decatur Dorsey, that's powerful. So if I could interject,
Sure.
in addition to what Michelle was saying, there are different ways. So are you trying to research your maternal line or your paternal line? You said that your mother was an ambush.
My grandmother is an ambush. My mother's slide.
Right, so just remember, it's not a linear process.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, they may not have always been Fawcett's, they may have been ambushes, Delauners, or Dorseys. Now, if you're related to Dorsey,
Yeah.
you trace your ancestry to Dorsey, of course that's powerful. He was a Medal of Honor winner. And by the way, from your research, where was he born?
Decatur, I don't know.
New Market area.
It was New London.
Born in New Market area and buried in New Jersey.
Yes, okay, so bingo, so we're going to claim him, right?
So he was born a slave, and he was released by his owner to enlist in the 39th United States Colored Infantry Regiment in March of 1864. As a flag bearer, his unit in the Battle of Cater, in July 30th of 1864, he earned a Medal of Honor for leading the regiment to the Confederate works and rallying the men when they were forced to fall back.
You have a lot of information to go with. What it is how knowing how to take what you have and dig further. And there are people at AARCH that can help you with that. We have how many genealogists are quite a few.
I'm not volunteering my services.
No, I know you're not. But we do have people.
He was born in 1836.
Yeah, I know all about it. I'm just saying that if you can trace your lineage back to him,
You've gone far.
then you can do some more.
You've gone very far.
So now you have Dorsey's, you have Fawcett's, you have, did you say Ambush?
Ambush, my grandmother.
Right. So there are multiple ways to reconstruct that family history, but just remember, it's not linear.
It isn't. But also know too that there's several families, like there's several Dorsey families. I'm sure you're not related to the same Dorseys that I'm related to. There's a lot of different Dorseys.
Yeah, my
Okay.
dad,
White and
my
black.
stepdad was a Dorsey as well.
White, of course, white and black. I mean, the people who owned the plantation where I'm in Baltimore County, there were Dorseys. There was a iron furnace that was there. That's a different Dorsey. The Dorseys my grandfather came from are Carroll County. There's a whole different history. So Dorsey is a ubiquitous name here in Maryland. So we have to be real careful about which Dorsey. You go look to the Maryland State Archives. You go to any place, the Historical Society, and look up Dorsey. You're going to get a lot of stuff. So it is. Cheryl's right that knowing what you're doing, there are methods to take that even further. But you've gone further than most. Yes, you've gone considerably far back for. And there's a lot of other things to consider, like little tricks of African American history and other things to kind of dig for. But like I said, there are some. I'm not a genealogist, but there are. I'm just a boring history professor. But we do have quite a few that. My daughter can attest to that. She grew up just like, does this have to be another vacation where we go and visit a cemetery? And she was also homeschooled, so then like on top of that, it's just like, poor child. But anyway, the children of historians, But there's a lot of things. I'd be happy to talk to you, maybe put you in touch with some of and Dean would have an idea of which genealogists may be able to help He's the head of the research committee for AARCH.
And we just talked to him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we have several people in the research committee
Who are you?
Yes.
Yes.
Some who do it for business.
I've
Yeah.
done some too.
And Mary does.
Oh, do you? Oh, okay. So there are people that can help that know how to do research for Africa. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I'm just saying that. Yeah, that's,
You didn't see me do my finger like this.
so, yes. Okay.
I'm sorry. I found also for me, historic, also classes that you can take.
Yes.
Colleges have classes that you can take.
As a matter of fact, Carlene is gonna be doing some for the
No, I mean, that's
Art.
colleges.
Yeah.
The colleges have
No, she's gonna do.
Yeah, but your
You know.
knowledge is just as
And
valuable.
then there's an organization called AARCH, African American Genealogy Historical Society. They're great also.
What's your name?
As far as helping you guide you along. And it's on internet.
Right.
Who's that?
I found a Joining Association is a fantastic start. If you don't know where to start. Like,
And it's helpful.
blogs and taking classes. Okay?
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I didn't know you were doing some workshops too, so that's great. I know you did the laundry.
Blogs and.
Okay. All right, so there are people that could help you, but I would say that you've done quite a wonderful job on your own. That's impressive that you've gone back.
When you don't know who you are, that's the thing that you do. You dig in.
Yeah.
And this is all internet stuff. Is the only thing where I
Right. But that's great. And I mean, things are now, you can get, muster rolls. You can get so many things if you want to, if you want to pursue the military part, if you want to pursue other parts. There's different, as Cheryl was saying, there's different ways to go. And that you can, there are different ways. So that's great. That's good. I like to hear that people are doing that. So now we're going to open it up to questions. I guess the formal program is over. But were there any questions about the Recovering Identity Project? Questions about how you can get involved and become a part of this? Because we definitely want more community involvement in this project. It should not be sort of a top-down type of a thing. Yeah.
For sure, I have one concern. We found my paternal ancestral cemetery. It's on private property.
Oh, yeah.
And it traces my lineage back to the 1700s. So, and I actually go to the same gym that the man owns that property. Anyway, I think that there would be special issues involved with that.
I've worked with people who are places that are on private property.
Yeah.
There are, I mean, if you know the gentleman, I've often gotten permission to go on private property.
Well, yeah, I mean, he allows us to.
Oh, well then,
go there.
okay, great.
But in the context of it being recognized as a historical site, that's
a process, and you know what?
Yeah. And certainly I don't expect an answer right now, but
Amanda, well, I didn't. Yes, they would definitely know that whole process. I've worked on it tangentially on working on the project. I know it's a considerable amount of work that you have to put in order for that to happen, but I think it's definitely worthy of that happening. So I think that's an important piece. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Anybody else have any additional questions or anything they would like to share?
I would like to ask a question.
Yes.
Okay. You're doing math.
Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes. That's better, but I understand. If you come on higher.
So we're in phase 2 of your recovering identity, and you're moving out of the northern part of the county. Are you coming to my part of the county now, which is, I was in Marshall, Petersville, Brunswick area?
The second phase covers the entire county, but I'm gonna let Amanda answer that.
So originally when we planned this, we thought we were gonna go region by region and model after what phase one did, but we learned from MHT that they preferred that we would just do the historic context first and find all the sites potentially in the county, and then come back and do individual, those MIHP forms that Elizabeth pointed out to you for phase one, coming back and doing those. So we will be all over the county, in all places for this context study, and then we'll have a list generated from there of different sites we want to specifically get more information on to come back and designate, whether it's National Register, maybe talking to people about, we have a local designation program called the County Register that provides financial resources to people with those properties. So talking to people about various designation and prospects.
So how do I go about getting the cemetery that I'm interested in my part of the county, on your radar?
I think Bo's got some forms here that you can fill out, so that survey form that we talked about. You can fill those out on paper and you can mail them back, email them back, and then you can also go online if you want to go online and tell us about those sites as well.
What cemetery is that we're talking about?
This is in Knoxville. Knoxville, yeah, Knoxville, South Mountain Road. Cemetery, Black Cemetery. That we're trying to. A lot of the ownership back there.
Yeah, ownership of cemeteries is a real difficult.
My mom's buried back there, my grandmother's buried back there, and we go in there and claim my mom and grandma, but there's a lot of other graves back in there. My mom used to say, there was a whole bunch of graves back there that no one even cares about. And we don't even have a road like many to get into the cemetery. So we're trying to get some work done so these people can get back. We've already put up a sign saying,
Madeline Butler's here? Is Madeline Butler part of that?
Yeah.
Okay, I've talked to her, so let's chat maybe after this, or I'll give you my contact information. And Bo's worked some with cemetery ownership issues too, so together we can maybe hopefully find some path.
And the Maryland room at the AARCH, do they have some resources that can help with that?
Sure. Yes.
I think that, contact, have you been to Mary Mannix?
Actually, we have just come to the dead end.
Okay.
Our just don't go any further. And nothing's changed, we just don't know. There's no other name to look for.
I remember that property, so we'll chat.
Yeah. These are the things that are so important, and all of this is crucial. It actually matters. So, yeah, definitely connect, because that's what the grant is for. That's what this project is about, is to make sure all of these are recognized, are documented, and if any further measures need to be taken, then make sure that happens as well. Bo has if you're interested in contributing some information, being a part of oral history, or in any way want to be a part of this, he has that information. So please do get that. I want to welcome any other questions. I just want to tell you, I like to tell stories. And I just wanted to tell you about a project that I'm working on that I was telling my mom about. My mom was like, where? I never knew that was a thing. The Emancipation Club building.
Organization.
I'm sorry?
Yeah.
The club building.
Building. Association building. Emancipation.
Part of the time it was club, and I just did some research.
Oh,
and
okay.
part of the time it was association, and part of the time it was just club.
Okay.
The name was changed. I just found this out a couple days ago. That it changed names. It had 3 different names over the course of going on. Anyway, it is 158 160 West Allstate Street, which is a duplex. So I'm doing some further research about the building, but also about emancipation celebrations in Frederick County and in the region. And so there's going to be a historical sign that will be put up on All Saints Street that's going to be coming in another year or so. So look out for that at an important site. And I know for a fact, and the reason why I'm mentioning this is they're applying for more grants, they're looking for more, to do more historical signage, markers, and these are the type of things, a project that you're working on right now could be the next historical sign in Frederick County. It's not just the city thing, although this is Frederick City that's working on this, but they're looking to expand that beyond just the city. So there could be something that you're working on that would be appropriate for some signage, some markers, some other things. So keep that in mind. There's recovering identity, but there's other things going on in Frederick. This is a beautiful time. Had Frederick been like this when I left, I might have come back. My mom, I think, would love that. But I lived in Ohio, I lived in a couple places, and when I moved back, she said, "You're moving to Frederick, right?" And I was like, I had no fond memories of Frederick. Growing up African American, growing up, just sort of the experience I've had, growing up, I was like, I don't want to go back to there. But it has changed. It is definitely changed for the better.
You gotta be here to make the change.
There you go. You know how much I drive to Frederick? How much do I drive to Frederick? My whole family's here.
You was all right with leave, because if you would, you might have married one of your cousins.
My mom warned me. I would come home, I would say, "Oh, I bet that he's cute." She's like, he's an ambush. She's probably related. You can't date him. My mother used to put me on point, make sure that I didn't.
My daughter's never gonna come back.
Yeah, but you know what? You never know. So, Liz.
I just wanted to say to the gentleman that was speaking of the Calamen, we have them in our North County study. They intermarried with the Pattersons of Pattersonville. So in the context index, which has been very carefully indexed, there are many, many, many names. So if you're doing your genealogy, your family history, I would encourage you to check that out for North County connections, because the people from the North County didn't just go to Pennsylvania, they went obviously other places. So
yeah, there's a wealth of information just in this room. People who've been doing research in different areas. So there's a lot of people who may have some of the information that you're looking for. And recovering identity is a good point place. AARCH is an excellent point place to kind of start if you're looking to move further with any of the work that you're doing on your own. Any last questions?
Not a question, but as far as your world history that you're looking for, now the county has recently, last year, opened Othello Regional Park. That's something that I'm sure everybody in Frederick County has heard of.
Yeah.
Is that something that I would think you guys would have that information?
Yes.
We do not.
She knows everything.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, we know that. I was in
there was an extensive archaeological and historical report that's in the MHT library for Othello, because my firm worked on it. But there's probably more obviously.
So, as a Frederick County Parks and Rec employee, we are constantly updating information about that park and the related families. I have a connection with Estelle Bell, who is one of the descendants, and so I've talked to her. But yeah, I would love to talk to you.
Yeah, if you start with the recovering identity side, if you start with AARCH, they can guide you to people who have been working on a lot of this stuff. They can lead you to the people who are going to be able to help you move your project that much further. So definitely make sure you get in touch with either with AARCH or the recovering identity. There's cards. Amanda's gonna pass them out. If there are any questions, again, I want to thank everyone for coming out. This is the first of, I think, 3 meetings we're going to be doing. And so, Dean.
Yes. In case you guys don't know about David Wallace, who's a local historian, he put together something called the Death and Burial Notices of African Americans in Frederick County. It's incredibly extensive. He went through tons of newspapers, wrote down all the information about who died when, where they buried, other bits of information. It's in the Maryland room of the Frederick County Public Library, but it's also online. You go to the Enoch Pratt Library website, to their, you have to enter death and burial notices of African Americans in Frederick County, and it'll come up.
Thank you. And
Oh, and anybody
it's really good. Go to Dean, go to Rose, go to Sarah. There's so many people in the room who know this. So I'm gonna, if you have cards or contact information, Dean, Sarah, Rose, I mean, anybody, we have yeah, I have it, because I got it from Enoch Pratt. So I forgot about that. There's so much out there. All right, well, I want to just say thank you. And again, thanks Gary Rollins and the Rollins family for hosting this event and being so gracious about letting us use the space for the evening. Hopefully we hear from more of you. You guys are talking amongst yourselves. Hey, I'll keep talking. I teach college, my students are always running their mouths, and I just keep talking. So thank you again.